What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing 4 incredibly strange and bizarre mysterious disappearances. The reason there's 4 seemingly random mysterious disappearances in this video is because none of them had enough information for me to be able to really cover them in a full video as I like to do on their own. And because these videos do premiere with you guys being able to watch and chat about the video and talk with one another as I'm going through the information, I don't like to have the videos be too short. So I compiled 4 of the strangest that I found so far. 3 of them you'll find in my newest book that's going to come out in the beginning of the new year, Gone Mysterious Disappearances Volume 4. And the other one I just thought was too insane to pass up speaking about. But again, I couldn't speak on any of them on their own. So I took them, I combined them, and I hope you enjoy this video. Before I say, let's jump right in, I would like to thank my members, my patrons, the people that purchase readings and other boxes and other things like that from me, the people who donate financially, donate their time, donate their energy, all the people who I've become such amazing friends with throughout this 4-year YouTube journey. I don't plan on quitting anytime soon, but I feel like those people who are there, you know, through most of the live streams, watching everything I do, purchasing my books, really supporting me above and beyond. And there are so many of you, probably most of whom are watching this in the premiere or immediately after, that I just really wanted to acknowledge today. So with all of that being said, thank you guys from the bottom of my heart, and let's just jump right in. Let's start with Muahz. In March of 2018, Muahz was a normal 30-year-old man who was enjoying his relatively normal and happy life in Hanover, Germany. Muahz was originally from Hutkau in southeastern Poland, but in Hanover he had a normal job as a construction worker, and he was excited about his life. His pregnant fiancée was back in Poland, and she was about to give birth to their first child. On March 28, 2018, Muahz decided to take a little bit of time off work to go and visit his pregnant fiancée at her home in the village of Lipia Góra in northwestern Poland because he didn't want to miss the birth of his child, and she was due to give birth at any day then. And I am bad at pronouncing things, guys, so if I pronounce anything wrong, I don't mean to offend anyone. Muahz left Hanover in his car at around 11:30 that morning, and he was happy, content, and in a really great mood. He was not only looking forward to seeing his new baby for the first time, but also he was thinking about the bright future his new family had ahead of them, and by all accounts, he was all smiles that day as he headed out. However, Muahz would never arrive at his fiancée's house, and what would happen next was a series of bizarre and strange, still unsolved mysteries that are baffling, to say the least. Muahz's fiancée was expecting him to arrive at around 9 o'clock the following morning, but at around 11, so 2 hours after she had expected him, she received a text message from him, and it said that there had been a lot of traffic. He was running very behind his schedule, but that he would see her soon. His fiancée waited some more, excited to see him, and probably also thinking about the bright future the 3 of them had together, him, her, and their new baby. But as time wore on with no more messages and no sign of Muahz at all, she became increasingly worried that something had happened to him. He wasn't answering his phone, and he wasn't responding to any of her texts or calls to him that entire day after she spoke with him earlier in the morning. She eventually decided to call his mother and his sister, but neither of them had heard anything from Muahz either. And when they called his phone to try to get a hold of him, they were also unsuccessful. His father lived in Hanover, and he said that he had heard from his son that day at around 10:30 that morning, and Muahz had told him there had been an inordinate and unexpected amount of traffic, but that he would be arriving at his fiancée's village very soon. The traffic was apparently all concentrated near the Polish village of Szczecin, which is right near the German border, about 133 miles from his intended destination. His fiancée and his family decided to just continue to wait for him to arrive, figuring he would eventually show up and tell them all about what happened. However, once the following morning rolled around, they contacted the authorities and reported Muahz as missing. At that time, they were told because he hadn't been missing for that long and because he was a grown adult, not much could be done about it. They were told by the authorities to keep patiently waiting and that he'd eventually show back up. Several more days would pass without any sign or word from Muahz, and with each passing moment, his family became more and more worried. It was also becoming more obvious that something was very wrong, and because of his family's insistence, finally, the authorities listed Muahz as a missing person. Officially, anyway. Muahz was reported as missing both in Germany and in Poland. The Polish authorities were able to determine that his phone had been on for several days after he had last used it to call his father and his fiancée, and that it most likely died on its own eventually. However, neither they nor the German authorities were ever able to locate Muahz's phone. Also, it was very bizarre that the Polish authorities learned that Muahz's cell phone had never connected to a Polish network, which should have made it impossible for him to have made those calls to his fiancée and his father in the first place on the day he went missing. The border wasn't staffed with actual human beings or people, but there were CCTV cameras all over it, and when every second of the footage had been checked and gone through, they saw that Muahz had never made it to Poland at all. At this time, Muahz's family thought the authorities really weren't taking his disappearance very seriously or doing enough to try and find out what happened to him or where he was. So they took it upon themselves to investigate and started with retracing the entire route he was to take from his home to his fiance's village. They questioned potential witnesses on their own, hung missing persons flyers everywhere they could think of along the route from his house in Hanover to his fiance's house in the small Polish village. They even went so far as to plead with the public for information on television, but there was no information, or so it seemed, to be found at all as to what happened to Muahz Kwiecki or what became of his cell phone and his vehicle. No new leads were coming in, and the case stalled as quickly as it had started, both for the police and for his devastated family. At this point, the police basically shrugged their shoulders and told the family they had done all they could and suggested he had run off on his own to start a new life somewhere. As far as they were concerned, there was nothing more to be done, and the case was all but closed. However, this whole case would take a very grim and heartbreaking, albeit a very bizarre, new twist not too long after. On September 12, 2018, one of Muahz's mother's neighbors visited her at her home on her small rural farm in Hutkow, Poland, and the neighbor told her that they were concerned about a very foul stench that seemed to be emanating from her barn, which was located on the edge of his property. So the neighbor was like, look, there is this foul stench coming from your side of the property, from your barn. The neighbor stated that the smell had been rotten and had been getting progressively worse since around the early weeks of July. He said that he thought she had a dead animal out there, and he offered to go out into the barn and check it for her. He figured if there were something rotting out there, he could just remove it for her. She agreed, and the neighbor went into the barn to check things out. Instead of finding a deceased and rotting animal carcass, he instead found something far worse up in the attic area. There were some clothes, and inside of those clothes was the badly decomposed remains of a human being. The authorities were called in, and they arrived not too long after. The scene was gruesome, with them finding the decapitated torso of a man in one spot, with the head lying not too far away from it, and the head was missing a lot of its teeth. The remains were too decomposed for anyone to make any sort of positive identification right there on the spot. The clothes were extremely bloody, and they even had some of what were presumably the victim's teeth stuck to them. And it seemed to everyone there that this had been done on purpose. So someone had taken the teeth, whether after they fell out or pulled them out, and meticulously stuck them to the shirt. There were no signs of a struggle, though, and no weapons at all were in the immediate vicinity. It was a baffling case, no doubt. A backpack was also found, and there were 2 nooses hanging from the ceiling of the barn that hadn't ever been there before. The backpack contained within it a cell phone, wallet, a Polish water bottle with cigarette butts in it, and a box of orange juice. There was no vehicle anywhere and no keys either. It didn't take long for the Polish authorities to determine that the remains were those of the missing man, Muahz Kwiecki. A criminal investigation was then launched, and within that investigation, there would be a slew of extremely odd and very strange clues, all that pretty much led nowhere and shed no light at all on the situation or onto what could have happened to Muahz that he ended up in his mother's barn the way that he had. The backpack was almost immediately confirmed as having belonged to him, but his whole family insisted that not only did he not drink orange juice, but that he absolutely hated it and wouldn't have had it with him for any reason. The cell phone showed that the last call had been made from it on March 30th, and it had been a call made to his uncle from the phone, but it hadn't even lasted long enough for it to really do more than just connect. It was as though he either accidentally or misdialed the number or changed his mind about making the call immediately after punching the number in. There was no other DNA found at the scene or any fingerprints in the barn or on the backpack other than Matush's. Bizarrely enough, the family had used the barn all summer long up to that point, and the investigators wondered how they never noticed the body or the stench that went along with it in the hot summer heat. Somewhat unbelievably, the Polish authorities officially concluded that Matusz had taken his own life. They claimed he hung himself and his head popped off when the body decomposed in the summer heat. His family was adamant that he never would have done anything like that, but the authorities had already made up their mind and refused to listen to anything else from the family or anyone else. Matusz's family told anyone who would listen that the police were botching the investigation, and evidence soon surfaced that may have backed up those claims. A severed foot was found inside of a shoe right there in some hay in the barn, showing that the authorities hadn't even thoroughly searched the barn in the first place. Therefore, they couldn't have possibly made an accurate determination as to what happened in it. In fact, it was later found that the Polish police told his family that searching the rest of the barn, quote, would just take too much time, end quote. The German authorities, however, were still investigating the case, and believe it or not, this is where things got even more bizarre. The call Matusz had made to his father on the day that he initially went missing, when he told his father that he was stuck in traffic on the 28th, was determined not to have come from Szczecin at all, but rather it had been made from inside Germany. That meant Matusz had lied to both his father and his fiancée about where he had been and how far along he was on his trip at the time he had called them. German police also found evidence that he hadn't even been heading in the direction of his fiancée's house at all, but had instead taken a train to the German border town of Frankfurt an der Oder a day after he had spoken to his father and fiancé and told them about the traffic situation. I think that town is Frankfurt an der Oder. Sorry. After that, Matusz headed to the Polish town of Słubice, which was just across the river from the initial destination. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed Matusz checking into a hotel, and he wasn't alone. He was with an unidentified person. The following day, he was seen boarding a train to Warsaw, Poland, all by himself and without his mysterious companion from the night before. From Warsaw, he had taken a bus to the town of Zamość, which is located about 13 miles away from his hometown, where his body would eventually be found in his mother's barn. No one knows how he got to his hometown, where his car ended up. No one really knows anything. So what happened to Matusz Kowecki? There's still no new information to this day, and the official stance by Polish authorities is that he pre-planned an elaborate and albeit very bizarre taking of his own life, right? I don't know if I could say the S word. His family still doesn't believe that theory and is just as adamant that there has to be foul play involved. After all, who was the unidentified person with him at that hotel? That person has never come forward or otherwise been identified, and it stands to reason that if someone wanted to take their own life, they wouldn't need to go through all of this trouble that he allegedly did to do so. What about the orange juice, which he never drank and couldn't stand the sight or smell of? There are so many unanswered questions in this tragic case, and Matusz's family is still searching for answers and for justice. I really hope that one day they get it, because this one was crazy. This isn't going to be in the new book because they found what happened to him, and even though it's bizarre and strange, the Gone series that I'm doing is about supernatural, paranormal, otherworldly, extraterrestrial disappearances, and I think this has a definite human element to it. I think he was murdered. I don't understand anything else about this case. Let's move on to Lars Mittank. Lars Joachim Mittank was born on February 9th, 1986 in Berlin, Germany, and his bizarre disappearance is one of the strangest I've ever come across. And with how many cases of mysterious disappearances I've covered across my channel, across my career, that's really saying something. Lars grew up in Itzehoe, Schleswig-Holstein, and he lived there for his entire life. Lars had a serious girlfriend and spent a lot of time with his friends when he wasn't working at the local power plant. Lars also spent a lot of time with his parents, just hanging out and being with them, and when his father suffered a stroke, Lars would take even more time out of his days to go and visit his parents' home and help out after he finished his shift at work. Lars, by all accounts, was described as just being, quote, a normal person, end quote. There had never been any indications that this young man would come to be known as, quote, the most famous tourist, end quote, or that his long unsolved disappearance would become such an enduring and bizarre mystery for years and years. It is still unknown what happened to him, so let's just start at the beginning. On June 14th, 2014, 28-year-old Lars went on vacation with 5 of his friends to Varna, Bulgaria. The group stayed at a very popular resort called the Golden Sands, which is located just outside of the city of Varna. When interviewed on German television 2 years later, one of Lars's friends that was with him on that vacation said that the week went by really fast and that they all just relaxed on the beach, played football, went clubbing, and swam in the resort's pool. There was nothing unusual about Lars's behavior. Another friend who had been on the fateful trip said he did notice that during the vacation, Lars really wasn't eating as much as he normally would have eaten. He said he was really just having like small salads or small cups of soup. But other than that, there was really no indication of the madness that was to come. Everyone else on the vacation just agreed with that statement, that he really wasn't eating well, but other than that, or he wasn't eating as he normally did, right? He was eating less food and different things. The men were supposed to return home on July 6th, and on the 5th, they visited a bar in town. While there, Lars got into an argument with some other German nationals over football, and the situation seems to have escalated very quickly. Lars was a fan of SV Werder Bremen, and the other men were fans of the other team playing against that team that night, FC Bayern Munich. And these are college-age guys. And these are young men drinking at a bar on vacation, having the time of their lives. I can see how young men of that age drinking, like a fight could escalate so much more quickly than under regular circumstances, right? Or if it were a much older gentleman in the situation. So after the disagreement somewhat broke up, Lars left his friends outside of the bar, possibly in order to cool off after the altercation, but he was gone for the entire night after that. When he returned to the resort the next day, he was battered and he was bruised. He told his friends that he had been beaten up by a group of men who had been hired by the 4 men in the bar with whom he disagreed over football the previous night. How Lars knew this, or why he thought he knew this, is still unknown, as he never explained anything further. Lars was in really bad shape and had suffered an injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum. Lars had no choice but to go and see a doctor while on vacation, and that doctor advised him not to fly because of the injury to his ear. Lars was prescribed an antibiotic called Cefrovil at a dose of 500 milligrams per capsule, which I looked it up, and this seems to be a normal dose for something like that, according to the internet. I'm not a doctor. Lars's friends all offered to stay with him so that they could all leave together and he didn't have to leave by himself, especially with his injuries, but he insisted that he was fine and would be fine to stay the extra time on his own. He convinced them all to follow their initial travel plans for the most part and to fly home on the 7th. So they were all staying the extra day, and then his friends would leave and he would follow when his eardrum was better. That's exactly what everyone did, and none of them had any reason to think anything so tragic or strange would come of that decision. Lars checked out of the original resort at the same time as his friends, and he checked into the Hotel Color in Varna in order to stay an additional night before he could fly. So I guess he wasn't staying much longer. It seems now that he was only staying an extra 2 days and an extra day from when his friends left. However, the day after his friends left, Lars started to behave strangely, and it said he was acting very paranoid for seemingly no reason at all. While at the Hotel Color, he called his mother Sandra and whispered to her that people were trying to kill him, or at the very least, trying to rob him. He begged her to cancel his credit cards. The hotel had closed circuit television, and the cameras caught Lars pacing up and down the hallways, looking out of the windows, and even at one point, hiding inside one of the elevators. He left the hotel at 1 a.m, but returned an hour later, and it's still unknown where he went and what he did in the hour that he was gone. Later on that morning, he once again called his mother and told her that the people who were after him were getting closer and closer in their pursuit and that it wouldn't be long until they got a hold of him. Lars Matank was last seen at Varna Airport on July 8th as he was planning on flying back home to Germany that day. He texted his mother when he arrived at the airport, letting her know that he was there and waiting to board his flight home. For some reason, Lars decided to go and consult with the airport doctor, a man named Kosta Kostov. Dr. Kostov would later say that Lars had been acting, quote, nervous and erratic, end quote. Dr. Kostov said he told Lars that he was fine and he could travel back home without any problems or issues. However, even after being told he could leave, Lars didn't leave the doctor's office. He stuck around and started talking about how he had doubts about the antibiotic medication he had been previously prescribed. Due to the airport undergoing construction at the time all of this was going on, it wasn't strange or uncommon to see all sorts of construction workers walking around the airport. But when one of those construction workers entered the doctor's office while Lars was in there, it seems as though all hell broke loose. At the sight of that construction worker, the doctor said that Lars began to shake and tremble uncontrollably before screaming out, quote, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here," end quote. He then stood up and ran out of the office. He left behind everything, including his luggage, his wallet, his cell phone, and his passport. Airport security cameras captured him fleeing the terminal, seemingly running for his life from some unseen force, threat, or person. Or maybe a little of all of the above. And you can actually see this footage if you search YouTube. Once he left the airport, the cameras outside caught him jogging away from the airport, climbing over a fence, running into a nearby meadow, and leaving the view of the lens for good. This was the last known footage ever taken of Lars Matank. No one knows what happened to him once he fled the airport on that fateful day in July of 2014. The police in the area couldn't find a single clue as to where he ended up or what happened to him, and so his mother Sandra hired a private investigator so that she could hopefully find her son, and if not, at least some answers as to what in the world became of him. The private investigator's name was Andreas Gutig, and one of the first things he did was check all of the hospitals in the area for someone there who didn't have identification, but in the end he had no luck. Despite Lars being a very experienced hunter, fisherman, and tracker, it's doubtful to many who know that area that even with his skills and extensive knowledge in those areas, that he would have been able to survive the intense heat of the summers on top of the lack of food and water. There have been many reported sightings of Lars in the years since, but none have ever been confirmed, and his mother Sandra still believes he's out there somewhere, but that he possibly has amnesia and doesn't remember who he is or where he's from. Lars Matank is known today as, quote, the most famous missing person on YouTube, end quote, with the footage of him fleeing the airport having been viewed more than 16 million times in the first 4 years since his disappearance. He's listed as standing at 5 feet and 11 inches tall with dark blonde hair and a scar on his left forearm. Today, Lars would be somewhere around 37 years old. There has been so much speculation and so many theories and rumors circulating online about this case, it's enough to make your head spin when you're trying to get down to the actual facts of it. Many people believe that the men from the bar whom Lars got into an argument with, that they somehow kept track of him throughout his ordeal after the beating he received, and eventually they grabbed him and killed him or did something sinister to him, while others believe that this theory is a huge stretch of the imagination. So I want to say I also think that's a big stretch. They're hunting him down and killing him over football. It's not like money was placed on it. Like, he just was talking smack about the other team, and they were talking smack about his team. And because of, I think, their age and the fact that alcohol was involved, it got heated. I'm not even sure I believe that they were the cause of the beating with that gave him the broken eardrum that he got. Do you know what I mean? Like, why would they hire when did they have the time to, like, hire professionals or hire anyone to go and search out where Lars was, right? They would have had to have followed him from the bar. It just is so outlandish that they even had anything to do with that beating. So I'm going to go from here and read basically what I wrote in the book, and I'll add anything in as I think more about this. I wrote, before I get into what I honestly think happened here, I need to explain that I believe certain types of so-called mental illness aren't that at all. I believe that some people are just more open to receiving than others, meaning receiving the truth about our world and the worlds around us, things most of humanity can't handle or possibly wrap their heads around, and therefore we call it mental illness because we can't understand it otherwise. I believe that the knock to the head Lars received, regardless of who gave it to him, caused him to spontaneously open up to the worlds around us, and that he wasn't paranoid at all, but possibly seeing things no one else could, or at the very, very least, aware of things most others aren't aware of. It more than likely terrified him and made him very paranoid. He had an innate knowledge, or though it seemed, that something or someone was out to get him. I believe it could have been many things, but I narrowed it down to just two for the sake of keeping this short and being able to explain it in the simplest terms possible. My first theory here is that Lars somehow switched timelines and ended up seeing something he shouldn't have in some alternate reality or dimension. Whatever beings or creatures live in that world knew that he saw whatever it was and chased him down to silence him. Maybe they don't know and weren't aware of how people who talk about such things are treated, like in our reality, like called crazy. And they thought it could be a risk that they, whoever they are, could be exposed should he start talking about them. He would have more than likely been seen as a ranting and raving lunatic, but for the sake of my theory, let's say that these creatures or beings didn't know that. My second theory on this case is that Lars was targeted by extraterrestrials, and the paranoia and delusion about the men from the bar chasing him down, stalking him, and even beating him up that night were all planted into his head as a more reasonable explanation than I was abducted and aliens messed up while experimenting on me, right? So they implanted the beating as a way to explain the bruising and stuff, but really he was abducted and possibly experimented on. These beings, for whatever reason, possibly they saw the damage they caused this man and felt the need to intervene, or possibly some other sinister reason, they decided to take him with them. Lars's mother still waits for the day her son will return to her alive and well, even if with no knowledge of who he or even who she is, but I doubt very much that will happen and feel like it's more than likely no clues or evidence as to his whereabouts will ever be found. And the final two cases, I'm just going to read as I put them in the book. Earl Funk and Michael Heron. Earl Funk was an experienced hiker and well-known ginseng hunter from Stoughton, Virginia, who went missing in Shenandoah in late September of 2008. Despite the season and time of year when he vanished, the temperatures were unusually and unseasonably frigid, dropping to nearly 40 degrees Fahrenheit at the time of his disappearance. Earl also owned a cabin very close to the park and knew the area very well, so from the very beginning, there was an air of mystery to his disappearance, with people wondering how he, of all people, could just vanish without a trace in that area specifically. Once it was time for ginseng to be harvested in the area, Earl headed out to collect the herb. This wasn't anything new and something he did every year at this same time. On September 28th, he hopped onto his all-terrain vehicle and headed out into the forest with a job to do. Earl's friends and family knew he would be gone for a few hours, but expected him to return sometime late that afternoon. When he didn't show up by nightfall, they called the Shenandoah National Park Service and the Albemarle County Sheriff's Department. The search lasted 12 days and involved bloodhounds, hikers, law enforcement, the National Parks Service, Appalachian Search and Rescue, the Greene County Sheriff's Department, and a wide variety of relatives and other volunteers. A group of searchers found Earl's all-terrain vehicle right where they thought it would be, though I couldn't find any information as to where it was or why they thought they knew it would be there. An article in the October 15th, 2008 issue of the Star Exponent newspaper that detailed the strange clues they had found during their search read in part, quote, "Last week, searchers found a machete, hat, keys, a pack of cigarettes, a tent stake used for digging, and a boot within the original radius," end quote. That meant the original search perimeter and all of the items were identified as having belonged to Earl Funk. The strangest part was, aside from the fact that most of these items would have been in his pockets or at the very least on his person at the time of his disappearance, and that's where they should have been found in the end, was that they were seemingly tossed haphazardly around a very remote area on the outskirts of the park. The same article from above also described the 12th day of the search. Quote, "On Saturday, searchers went a little beyond areas already combed in that radius. That's when they found Funk's body in a thick and dense area at the bottom of a 100-foot rock face. Harding and Albemarle police spokesman Hopwood declined to talk about the potential cause of death, end quote. Later on, it was said that there was an undisclosed medical condition that had impaired his abilities while out there in those woods. Okay, so what happened? This sounds like a cut and dry case of someone with a medical condition maybe pushing themselves too hard and making a fatal mistake or succumbing to some sort of tragic accident as a result. But that's why I added another disappearance to this one. I'm not the first or only person looking into strange and mysterious disappearances who has made this connection, but I needed to include another case here so you can see exactly where I'm going with this one. Let's talk about Michael Edwin Heron. Michael Edwin Heron was a contractor who primarily lived in Maryville, Tennessee, but who owned a weekend residence at the end of Bell Branch Road in Happy Valley in Blount County. He had two sons, 25-year-old Matt and 27-year-old Andy, and by all accounts, they were a regular family. Michael's parents lived on a property located on the northern fringe of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which was adjacent to his own weekend residence, and they all loved it there. Michael would visit often, usually just to say hello or to help with some work around the property, which was his intention on this fateful trip we're about to discuss. He was there that day to mow the lawn for his parents, and it was nothing out of the ordinary at all, and there was no reason for anyone to think that anything would or could happen that would lead to the disappearance and tragedy that followed this fateful decision. On August 23, 2008, so just a few weeks before Earl Funk went missing and was subsequently found deceased under strange and mysterious circumstances, Michael had taken his truck and the trailer mower he owned to his residence across from where his parents lived, and he parked it at the beginning of his driveway. This was what he always did when he was there to mow his parents' lawn or do some yard work, either for them or for himself. As soon as he got to the property on Bell Branch Road, he went inside and placed his keys, wallet, money clip, cell phone, credit cards, and gun on top of the counter before going into his garage and getting onto one of his all-terrain vehicles and riding up the street with it to his parents' house. His parents' property and his were surrounded by a very large meadow, a lake just across from his own weekend residence, and there was also a lake located about a quarter of a mile south from both of these residences. Another very large lake called Chilhowie Lake was located less than 3 miles southwest of the properties on Bell Branch Road. Michael's house there stood on an elevation of somewhere around 1,500 feet. Michael's parents knew he was planning on coming by that day to help out with the lawn and expected him there around a certain time. When he didn't show up, they walked over to his property and entered his house. They found that his truck was in the driveway, the mower was on the trailer, and it was parked right where he always left it, and all of his belongings were on his counter. There were no signs of any disturbances, and so they just decided to wait it out and see if he would show back up. They waited one day, and when he not only didn't return, but they also hadn't heard from him at all, they called his sons to see if they knew where he was or what was going on with him. His sons had no idea where their father was, and both of them immediately left to head out to the property, and once they were there, they called the authorities and reported their father as missing. An investigation was immediately launched into the whereabouts of Michael Heron, and the sheriff's officers determined that he had driven off on his yellow Yamaha Wolverine ATV. They almost immediately found the vehicle near Adams Creek, which is located approximately 1 mile from his home out there. The ATV sat idle with the ignition switch still turned on, but they saw that the vehicle had been turned off using the so-called kill switch. His son said he would never have used the kill switch to turn off the ATV, and they immediately felt like something was very wrong. The vehicle had no damage to it and was sitting on top of a very steep hill. It was in high gear. The whole scene was just creepy and eerie, according to those there that day. Where this vehicle sat is less than a quarter of a mile from the northern border of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The local sheriff's department searched the area where the vehicle was found, utilizing canines, ground teams, foot searchers, helicopters, and horses. The National Park Service was also assisting in trying to locate Michael Heron, but as usual, and with so many cases we've covered in this series of books, inclement weather in the form of heavy rains pouring on the Happy Valley area at the time impeded the search efforts for them. The rains were heavy enough to have washed away any scent trails for the bloodhounds to follow. The Blount County Sheriff's Department issued a statement saying they don't believe Michael was involved in any criminal or illicit activity and that they don't believe this case involves any sort of foul play. Now here's where this story gets even more interesting. It's come to light that some of Michael's neighbors were interviewed several years later, and they had a very different tale to tell than the one that was given to the media to report, which is all of the information that I just reiterated to you. I'm going to call these neighbors Mary and Mark for the sake of maintaining their anonymity, as I'm unsure if the names given by another investigator are real or aliases, because the information they presented is crucial here, particularly in making the connection between the cases of Michael Huron and Earl Funk, in my opinion. Here's the story those neighbors had to tell about what really happened that day according to what they saw with their own eyes. Michael Huron was someone they were all used to seeing in the area, and everyone knew he would go to visit his parents and help them around their home and property on weekends most of the time. On the day he disappeared, Michael was seen by many residents in the area riding along towards Happy Valley with a smile on his face and waving to everyone he passed along the way. He eventually did make it to Happy Valley, and when he did, he turned east, continued straight for around 500 feet, and then turned north onto Happy Valley Loop Road. He continued east on that road, which turned right on its own, and then he headed east again. This is said to be a very beautiful and scenic area, and Michael was known to like to hike all around the lush and gorgeous area, and he knew it very well. As a result, there's no reason whatsoever that he should have or would have gotten lost or turned around, and it was expected that Michael would travel the path he was on for another 400 feet because he had agreed to check in on a friend's property while the friend was away. So that's what our witnesses assumed he was doing. For some strange and unknown reason, though, instead of traveling the additional 400 feet to his friend's house, he made a sudden and sharp left turn and continued up a well-maintained but very desolate rural road. He rode on the slight incline to another very nice residence located about 1/8 of a mile up that road. Once he got there, he turned his ATV into that home's driveway and seemingly vanished. There are no notable landmarks in that particular area except for a small creek located to the east. Mary and Mark were almost desperate to leave the area after bringing the researchers there in 2011 and said that they got an eerie feeling from the place and didn't like to be there for too long, after explaining how much pain and devastation Michael's disappearance still caused his own family, in particular his parents and his sons. So let's first explore the oddities of Michael's case and then make some connections, possibly between his and Earl's. First and foremost, if Michael were simply trying to check on his friend's residence for them, why wouldn't he have just taken his truck? He didn't need an ATV to get to the area, and taking his regular vehicle would have been much easier, not to mention that road in particular, where his ATV was actually found, was one where the turn was so sharp that someone riding on it could easily be surprised by something and then have almost no way to get away from whatever the surprise was, should they fail to need to. So, you're riding along, and as soon as you turn the bend, there's a cougar, and it attacks. You know what I'm saying? Even though they would run, I'm just using that as an example. It just seems like it would have been more prudent for him to have taken his truck, not to mention he can get there and back faster. He knew his parents were waiting for him. And also, he didn't tell anybody, or at least he didn't tell his parents that day, and his sons didn't know that he had agreed to check in on this neighbor's property. Otherwise, they probably would have been less worried, at first at least, right? Because they would have been like, oh, he's just checking on so-and-so's house. Also, his truck would have brought him additional protection from wild animals and the elements, although by all accounts it was a very nice day that day. The condition Michael's ATV was found in showed that he was accelerating up the large hill when he somehow got off the vehicle. Michael was not described as having been a small man, and though he was 51 years old, he was said to be in great physical shape. I've read that whatever took him off of that vehicle, forcing him to use the kill switch, had to have been determined, quick, and very, very strong. I absolutely agree with that statement. It's like something came out of nowhere, grabbed him mid-acceleration off of his all-terrain vehicle, and then disappeared with him into the very same nothingness from which it had originally come. So what's the connection with Earl Funk? Two grown men who are both experienced with navigating the woods and who are used to being out in the wilderness alone for one reason or another disappear within 37 days of one another, both of them riding ATVs, both of them just barely outside of the perimeter of a national park, and with them being only within 2 years from one another in age, and it's supposed to be this giant coincidence. Maybe it is, but, it sounds to me like nothing to see here, folks. I don't think so. Items that belonged in Earl's pockets were found scattered around the ground, and only one of his shoes was ever found. Does that sound to you like someone was possibly picked up and carried, maybe over a shoulder, and that the items fell out of his pocket as a result? Also, it's said that when someone is hit with a hard impact, like being hit by a fast-moving vehicle or possibly a train, they can be knocked right out of their shoe or shoes. So, were these men both grabbed by something, possibly something neither of them could see, and brought somewhere else? In my opinion, it's just as possible as any of the ridiculous theories put forth by law enforcement about these cases being perfectly ordinary and run-of-the-mill. Again, nothing to see here, folks. It seems to me that Michael possibly did see whatever it was that eventually grabbed him, and that's why he made that sudden and unexpected sharp turn instead of going right to his friend's house, as it seems he had been intending to do. Why was the alleged medical condition that, according to authorities, helped end Earl's life while he was out there never disclosed? What's the big secret about? After all, if Earl was walking and if he was awake, conscious, and alert, he would have seen such a huge drop-off like that 100-foot cliff he was found at the bottom of from a mile away. This wasn't an inexperienced woodsman we're talking about here. What, did he just slide himself down the cliff or perhaps walk his way down, lie at the bottom of it, close his eyes, and die? That's absolutely ridiculous, if you ask me, and I don't believe it for a second. But if he was unconscious and had been knocked out somehow, like with an impact fast and hard enough to knock off at least one of his shoes, that would make more sense. There are so many mysteries here that I can't quite figure it out, though. If something grabbed Michael and Earl right off of their ATVs, then it would have had to have come from the sky, right? That's what I initially thought, until I thought again and remembered we have creatures out there that are invisible, one of which I encountered myself, that the internet calls the Glimmerman entity. Most of us know it as the thing from the Predator movie. What if Michael saw the shimmer of it in the immediate distance and tried to get away but couldn't? Look, I don't have all the answers, and I'm just trying to help you all make the connections here, but I would be willing to wager that, had Michael not emptied his pockets before leaving his house that day, his belongings would have also been found scattered all over the place, just like Earl's. Why was Earl seemingly, possibly, thrown off of a cliff and found dead while Michael was never found? Maybe it was the medical condition that took him out in the end after all, and whatever entity that abducted them realized it couldn't take him with it because he had already died, just from like the sudden terror and fright of being picked up, thrown over something you can't see's shoulder, and run off with. I don't want to continue speculating, but I will say that these two cases are the most bizarre I think I've covered so far, at least in the way that there is so very obviously something going on that's supernatural or otherworldly in some way, but the public, the authorities, and the press look at us in this community like we're the ones spinning yarns to try and sensationalize it all, to try to sensationalize these disappearances. They seem to be sensationalizing the normalcy of it all when nothing about either of these cases, nor most of the cases I've covered in these books or on this YouTube channel for that matter, are anything but normal and can never ever be, at least in my opinion. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. It's getting better, like the numbers are going up, but a lot of the people who watch all of or most of my content aren't even subscribed. We're already going together. Let's just make this thing official, all right? Check out the description box for important links to my books on Amazon, Kindle, paperback, Audible. If you want an autographed copy, email me before making the purchase. And I don't know if I have every single link to every one of my books on all three of those separate spaces in the description box because that's a lot of information. So just go to Amazon and type in Gemma Jade Books if you want to find my entire collection. Just make sure you email me before making the purchase, as I said, so that I can sign the book and then get it out to you. Links to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link. I believe Ghost Dragon ZW's Venmo's in there as well. Also, look me up on Facebook at Gemma Jade, TikTok, GemmaJadeYT. I really do appreciate it. Guys, I'm trying to get the 1,000 followers on TikTok so I can start live streaming over there and make a lot more money. There's just a lot of information in the description box that will help you guys out. If you need additional information, if you want to order something from me, if you have questions about how I do the readings, when I do the readings, what anything that I sell or do costs for me to do, email me for any and all correspondence, including to send in your personal encounters, supernatural, paranormal, otherworldly, extraterrestrial, at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. I've been speaking so much, so quickly, and for so long that I'm a bit tongue-tied. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.